Right, so I've been sorry, Genevieve.
Go on, you're okay.
On me a bit. Welcome, Genevieve Murray, who's going to talk about workplace bullying. And be interesting, this one, because we've always known that you've been looking at workplace bullying for a number of years, and now has a chance to tell us what you found, which I think hopefully will be hopefully interesting and hopefully not too scary at the same time. So,
really? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to listen to this lecture. My topic for my PhD was workplace bullying among post-primary teachers in secondary schools. And the idea came from Professor Mona O'Moore, who founded the Anti-Bullying Centre. And then we went from there when Mona retired with Stephen Minton. Dr. Stephen Minton then became my supervisor. So it's been a long journey, a very interesting PhD topic, and a very interesting topic for me in my own career. I'm now with the National Anti-Bullying Centre, and I have the workplace bullying strand, and I'm also MII workplace representative and on their workplace sector. So it's a very interesting topic, and I'll go ahead with my presentation today. If you want to stop me at any point, please do, and any questions, I have no problem. The outline of the presentation: I'll have the introduction, workplace bullying, a lot on that, the research design and methods for the study I did, and the findings, which for me is about intervention and prevention. Okay, defining workplace bullying. There are many definitions around the world, and the definition that I choose is with the Health and Safety Authority here in Ireland. And it's the definition that was used in the studies throughout that I have followed in the Irish context. So we define workplace bullying as repeated inappropriate behaviour, direct or indirect, whether verbal, physical or otherwise, conducted by one or more persons against another or others at their place of work and or in the course of employment, which could reasonably be regarded as undermining the individual's right to dignity. An isolated incident of behaviour in this definition may be an affront to dignity, but as a once-off incident is not considered to be bullying. Now, I have highlighted their repeated behaviour because most definitions in Europe, Ernestine and Lehman, the people who brought in and started research on workplace bullying, they would talk about it as an act every week over maybe 6 months, 2 acts a week over 6 months, or maybe, as Bjorks in Finland talks about, over a 12-month period. A long time, but that's what bullying is. So basically we're saying this inappropriate behaviours, it's about frequency and duration. And we talk about the isolated incident, and when we talk about an isolated incident, many people can label it bullying, but it's not actually bullying. A once-off row with someone, an argument, or someone maybe you're not receiving the information you should have received, which could be looked on as withholding information. But once off of that is not considered bullying. It has to be repeated. We're talking about frequency and duration. However, in comparing studies, it can be difficult because the definitions vary around Europe and around the world. So that can be difficult when you're coming back to start doing comparisons in studies. And also, if you do quantitative, where the definition, and you're looking at survey data, where in unstructured interviews, which I did, you're looking at qualitative. So you're looking at different data as well. So it can be very difficult to compare studies from definitions. Furthermore, the term bullying is not used in every country. It started with mobbing in Sweden and Germany with Lehman, and Ernestine and Giuseppe in Germany. In workplace bullying in Ireland and the UK, we very much call it workplace bullying. Harassment in Finland with Bjorks, and he talks about the workplace harassment scale, which is a survey scale that one uses to find out if a person is bullied. United States, they talk about workplace aggression. Emotional abuse as well in the United States and Canada, they vary. Australia, they'll call it psychological abuse, and harassment and psychological harassment in Canada. Canada very much talk about harassment. It was Catherine McKinnon that even brought in the sexual harassment bill in Canada going back to the 1970s. So, but if you tie them all together, they are psychological abuse. It is a psychological situation. This is where we differ in Ireland. We have harassment under the 9 grounds in the Equality Acts of 98 to 2011. And we have those 9 grounds, and therefore the single incident can come in under one of these 9 grounds. I say now, and I'll it's one thing about workplace bullying, it's quite complex because the behaviours on bullying and the behaviours on harassment can overlap. But if they're under one of these 9 grounds, one can take a case of a one-off incident. So these are for clarity, and people need to be very careful if they're going to say they're being bullied. They need to be very careful how they read these documents, because these are very important guidelines to go by. The nature of workplace bullying. Workplace bullying is very different to school bullying. So, you know, a lot of this goes on in school bullying, but there's nothing physical about it. No one has reported physical in workplace bullying. And it's very cunning, it's very devious, it's very quiet, it's very silent, it's very hidden, it's very under the carpet. So we're talking about issues like gossip and spreading rumours. Research recently from Vertita in Finland, and she comments that when she did a survey with a group of people who have said they were bullied, the one thing that upset them most was the gossip and rumours. You cannot take it back. And if you say, 4 or 5 people could be gossiping about something, and if you said to one of them, who told you, or how did you hear? They would say someone else, but they actually never heard or saw the issue themselves. And it's one of the issues that comes out very strongly, and the effects of it on people, it's very, very dangerous. Verbal abuse on an ongoing basis is totally unacceptable. But 2 people having an argument, that's life, that's the way it is. But we're talking interpersonal relationships in a workplace, where when we're in a workplace, we have this psychological contract whereby you have respect for me and I have respect for you, and there's a boundary that one does not step over. But people do not. Rousseau, the theorist, talks about that psychological contract. But we rarely speak about it, and it's starting to be spoken about now a lot on researchers. Psychologists are starting to come around to start researching it more. So therefore, we don't expect these behaviours to be happening while we're at work, that people are doing things like this to us. We can go from the personal to the organisational. So on the personal level, you have, as I said, verbal abuse. Social exclusion is huge when in relation to bullying. And what came up in my own study, and what comes up in research all the time, is the people are isolated because they've been bullied. People don't want to be associated with them because they know there's a problem going on. There's an interpersonal conflict with people, so people stay back. And then it then also ends up that the person who feels they are being bullied, they isolate themselves. They choose to stay away from people. It's easier, it's safer, it's quieter, it's less stressful. And that came up so much in my own study, but it came up in both areas. Because I did some interviews with people who alleged they'd been bullied. They were accused of bullying, and they felt the very same. Isolation was one of the big things that goes with workplace bullying. The devaluing of work, and that's very much the organisational, the employer or the supervisor or the manager, not valuing the person for the work they do, or giving work to people less experienced than them. And that happened in my own study as well, pardon me. That juniors were given far more work and far more responsibility than they could handle, and they hadn't the experience for it. And that meant the elder and the more experienced people felt they were isolated, and they looked on it as ageism, and that's one of the themes that came up in my own study. And you can see that, and managers, why they do it, one would question, why would people do that to people who are so experienced? Because after all, the experienced people are the mentors for the new people coming in. Excessively being monitored. I was talking to a person the other day, and their boss stood over them for months and days and weeks. They tried to change their time around, coming into work earlier so the boss wouldn't be there. The boss came in and did the very same. When that happens, you start to make mistakes. You become nervous. You're not as productive as you should be. So therefore, you come across as being not doing your job properly. So that is another part that's very, very difficult for employees, to handle someone over your shoulder, watching over you all the time. Severe criticism, they kind of link in. Excessively monitored, being severely criticised. Treated less favourably, back again. Devaluing your work. They all seem to link into each other. Unreasonable assignments. giving you work that's beyond your time limit or beyond your experience. And that's very, very dangerous. And it's very difficult to say to an employer, I don't have that experience, or you're pushing me too far. It's very difficult for an employee to handle that kind of issue. Okay. The effects of workplace bullying. Andrea Adams was a journalist in England who's passed away, and they set up the Andrea Adams Trust in her memory. And as she said, it creeps up on you long before you or anyone else are able to appreciate what it is that is making you feel the ill effects. Because with workplace bullying, as I said, it is so subtle. You're trying to get on with your work, you're trying to do your job, you're trying to, it's your career, it's your living, and you're not aware that what's going on behind you is actually starting to make you ill. It's actually starting to take away your confidence. It's actually starting to take away your self-esteem. And when she talks about this, she talks about the weakness, the effects of it. Depression. Depression is a huge one. And I've heard of so many people on antidepressants. Chronic fatigue, people don't sleep, so they're tired. They're not very well able to cope in work. And remember, all this is chipping away at your productivity and your confidence and how good you are at your job. Anxiety, again, linking in with depression. We talk of the loss of memory. This is because your focus is not on your work. Your focus is looking around and trying to keep your own confidence as well and keep your own self-esteem up. In my own study, I had a person who attempted suicide. People have taken their lives by suicide out of it. There has been articles in the papers about this. Prove it, it's very difficult to prove. Litigation, there is no win-win in this. Lawyers, I know in the recession there, they were going very much into employment law, but I know myself from people that have come to me in the centre that lawyers have said to them, look, go away and try and sort it out yourself. Because I have sat in the courts and I've seen judges just look at barristers and eyeball them as much as to say, get this out of my court, I cannot judge, how was I wasn't there. And when you hear the case, it's like children in a playground. So litigation is not, I would say to people, avoid it as best one can. Leaving employment, fight or flight. Many people do leave. And people leave because they have a career. They want references. They don't make the complaint. They don't do anything about it. They think of their future, think of the bigger picture. And they're possibly right. Because when I look at what people get into who do make complaints, it's very difficult. And it's a very difficult road. The domino, or ripple effect, as I would call it, is really very serious. Because not only are you upset in your workplace, you have colleagues upset. You have people who will say, stand by you, the bystander, and agree with you until you go make a move, and then they pull back because they're looking after their own career, and it is their livelihood. It's unlike school bullying in one sense, where school, they have parents, they have guardians, they have school principals, deputy principals. More than likely, people in the workplace have a spouse, children, very difficult situation. So the domino effect, it's very dangerous. Their colleagues, it becomes a very toxic workplace when something like this gets out of control. Excuse me. And also I found in my own study, and you hear it all the time, when people go home then, they're talking about it all the time around their dinner table, they're consumed by it. I had people in my own study that would say they went home and they rehearsed with their spouse how they'd address this person if they said this, this and this to them the next morning. It's no way to live. So that's why I find that a very serious issue. Now, when did research begin? It began in 1980 into all of this with Heinz Lehmann, and then in the Scandinavian countries it was very strong. It mainly began with psychologists and has been with psychologists for many, many years. It is only in, I'd say, the last 5 years possibly that sociologists, people like myself, have got more involved in this, and also that more qualitative work has been done, where one hears the voice, because previous to that it was more surveys. Extensive research, Germany, United Kingdom and Ireland. Mona O'Moore was the first to do a survey in Ireland into workplace bullying, and she opened the centre in Trinity College in 1996. And at the time, it was more school bullying was being handled, but we did go and do that survey in 2000. The United States, they have set up a workplace bullying institute over there. Huge amount of work, very good work. Australia, Canada, all over Europe, and then further into China, and it's starting to go further afield now. However, what's interesting, and I'm finding interesting in the work, is the different cultures as well, and what goes on in different cultures, and what behaviours would be acceptable and non-acceptable in different countries. What is it triggered by? It's triggered by interpersonal conflict. And really, this is where I don't really want to be in 10 years' time talking about workplace bullying. It is interpersonal conflict that has escalated and has not been handled correctly. And that is where we end up with workplace bullying. The Irish surveys. As I said, we did the national survey was done by Mona Moore. Then the task force in Ireland did another survey in 2001. So from that, I have it, as you see, 2004 and 2005, there was an expert advisory group set up with barristers, Professor Moore, and different people in the field, including the Health and Safety Authority as well. And the recommendations from that, well, they were looking for legislation. Legislation has never been touched since. And they decided to do another survey in 2007, which is the ESRI survey. And then there's my own work in 2012. But in the 2007, and in all of those surveys that were done here, the public sector came out higher than the private sector. Education was high, health was high. And in 2007, education was the highest. So it's an interesting one, and it still is there, and it's possibly in most countries in Europe that the public sector comes out higher than the private sector. Why teacher and teacher bullying? Well, surveys have been done, as I said, not specifically on teacher and teacher bullying, but in the surveys that I have here, the education sector came out high. Now, some of it was in primary schools, some of it was in post-primary schools. A lot of it was quantitative surveys. There was very few, if any, did The Voice, except the one in the United States there, Blas and Blas. And they did it on principals bullying teachers. And they did it with recommended samples. So they did it where they were recommended participants by different people in teaching. So it was a different, and it was telephone. So it was not necessarily, okay, they got The Voice, but it wasn't face-to-face interviews either. In Ireland, as I say, the various surveys we did, and in 2012, I made a representation to the Anti-Bullying Forum for the National Action Plan. That's something being included in it for teachers, because going back to 1993, the Department of Education and Skills, they talk about teachers being the role models for their students, and nothing had been done since. And in the action plan at the back of it, there are the forms for pupils can fill in that are anonymous, that can go back into principal or deputy principal. And I was hoping that something similar would be put in for teachers as well. Just to give the principal and deputy principal an idea that something might be going on in their school if they weren't aware of it, and that maybe they could do something to bring people in to discuss it or whatever. But nothing like that has gone in since. Causes, well, we have the individual factor, organisational, and we have the bystander. So, there's no conclusive evidence at the moment, and I don't know if there ever will be, on the personalities of either the victims or the perpetrators. My research, I would feel, and researchers in general would feel, is a very fine line. Researchers show that victims, targets, conscientious people, but low self-esteem. Perpetrators, envious, domineering, highly manipulative, yet it comes out in some of the surveys, low self-esteem. So it's very difficult to point the fingers. You could have people in workplaces at a very vulnerable point in their lives, and that has happened before. That has come out in research. People maybe going through a divorce, coming out of a bereavement, just not in the right place at the right time, and people's picking up on that and bullying that person. However, we come back to the organisational variables, and they are leadership, culture, and other areas in management. So we talk about the work environment hypothesis and the psychosocial work environment hypothesis. So you're talking about the variables of leadership, culture, management. Then you're talking about the social effects on your climate, on your mental health. So those variables are studied separately, and Conor McGuckian and his colleagues have done a very good work on it with using the psychosocial inventory by Vaux, and it's a very good inventory. And they took conflict, they took burnout, they took alcohol abuse, and I'm not sure the other one, it'll come to me. And they did it very well. There's about 5 or 7 in it, and people vary it around, and they did a very good study on it. But you're trying to marry both together, because organisational leadership is so important. And if we don't have something coming from the top, then you have this laissez-faire, everybody just feeling they can do what they like. And that's not what the workplace is. There has to be some form of organisation within a workplace. And then we look at the bystander causes. Bystanders, as I said earlier, they may agree with you and they may see what's happening, but please come with me and I complain while I'm making this complaint. It's very difficult. So we go to leadership styles. We have autocratic, participative, laissez-faire and non-contingent punishment. And I suppose the second one there is the one we really need. We need the person to be fair. We need the person to participate, to know what's going on, to be fair with people. The autocratic style, I mean, in one sense you could say, well, okay, but they keep fear, but they do cause huge problems. Laissez-faire, that came up a lot in my own study. It was like, it'll go away. Don't worry, I'll sort it out in time, and hoping everybody will go away. And that never works. And so therefore we have to look at leadership styles. And leaders, I feel, and you can see it in my own study, I can see it in other research, people get promoted to be managers, to be leaders. It's a lovely title, might have a lovely salary with it. Hey, you're also going to be managing human beings. And human beings are quite complex people. So, can you do that? And this is what is never asked. And I have done seminars, I've done seminars with supervisors, leaders, and they're looking for this toolbox or a diploma I could give that will show them how to manage human beings. Every human being is different. You have 2 teachers, they're probably, say, high grades, very good teachers in their own jobs, 2 different personalities. And one has to accept that. And this is where management and supervisors, leadership, they pull back. They're not prepared to just go that extra. And HR, when I have HR people on talking about why are the managers putting this on my desk? Why are the supervisors putting this on my desk? Why can't they manage their staff? HR don't want to know. Now, that's not the right attitude either, because as HR, which in my day was personnel, the word even, personnel is in there. So, I mean, it's not all right for them either to take that approach, but that's the way it is. The Irish post-primary sector, as we know, and I'm sure most of you here are probably teachers, I'm not, I found it was massive, it was huge. And the complexity of the school system, voluntary secondary schools, the ACCS schools, all the different schools, and then to add to that 2 unions. And I just found it so complex when I started this study. And in some schools, there are 2 unions. So therefore, in some schools, you have 4 union reps, and therefore if I and Helen, say, is in TUI and I'm a ASTI, so I go to make my complaint about Helen or vice versa. So we've 6 people involved. And then you also have people in my study who said, I don't want to get involved, they're my colleagues, I don't have anything to do with this, and they are voluntary and they have that right to step back. So it's so complex, and this is all written up in definitely the TUI have this written up in the informal part of the policy, go to the rep on the ground. ASTI, different lines. So it's very complex. The system itself is complex before you even get into the core of the problem. And then you've NAPD, I can't forget to mention Clive Byrne, who is up to here over the fact that they're an organisation, they're not a union, they don't have any backing, they don't have any support, and therefore they feel very much out on a limb. If a complaint is taken against the principal has to go and pay their own fees for legal people, etc., etc. So it's not very good. The statistics on workplace bullying, the education sector, you see there, United Kingdom 16%, 20%. That recent study there in the UK, they're a very big study, so it's very difficult. Again, difficult to compare. And as I said, in 2007, 14% in Ireland. The research and design of my method. This wasn't an easy one, but I got around it. It was a qualitative approach because I wanted the voice. And I needed to, because it was such a sensitive topic, it was difficult. I didn't want people to refer people to me. I'm not a teacher, and I just wanted it to be very much my getting the sample. So we drafted up a questionnaire. Now, I did the questionnaire in conjunction with the two unions and in conjunction with Mona, and the idea was that I would get all the like the employment, were they full-time, part-time, all these different contracts, etc. So I get the whole thing correct. And at the end, we did a question. If you would like to partake in this study, would you please let us know? Now, there were ways, I did it on SurveyMonkey, and it was only coming out at the time, it was only coming into Trinity at the time. And people said, would you not do a postal questionnaire? I was afraid I'd probably get anonymous replies back on the questionnaire, but would I get the people to write back to me for fear it could get lost in the post, or where it mightn't land on my desk, it could end on Mark's desk while I'm not in, or something like that. You know, it was a risk I had to take. So we did the survey, and it was very interesting. I mean, I took out of it 26 interviews, but in the comments, like, what's the point in going forward to this? This is such a mess. All these, you know, little comments around it. But I did eventually get 26. And that was the way I did the online questionnaire. As I said, I'd opened and closed questions relating to different behaviours. I did put the HSA definition of workplace bullying in there as well. So I took 4 categories. I took teachers who were being bullied at the time of the questionnaire, people for whom the bullying had stopped, people who had alleged cases against them, and teachers who worked in a supportive environment, just to see what would come out of that. And the findings were that it was peer-on-peer bullying. So there was colleague on colleague, there was principal on teacher, there was head of department on teacher, teacher on head of department, and younger teacher on older teacher. It was very interesting because the themes that come through that when I look at it, I'll just take, say, one there, teacher on head of department. And one area of workplace bullying that's really never looked at is organisational change, and there's very little research done on that. And this teacher had taken a 2-year period out to go and retrain. So she was out of she was a head of school, a head of a department, apologies, and 2 teachers were in her place. And when she came back, she was personal friends, apparently, she said, with the principal. But when she came back, the 2 teachers weren't very kind to her, and they were very manipulative, and they were not letting her do her job, and they were interfering with her work all the time. And she went to the principal, and the principal said, sure, it's only the green-eyed monster. And this is when I do talks, I talk about off-the-cuff remarks. One has to be so careful. And she went back and she said, like, there was at one stage a student came into her and said, you know, they really don't like you. And this is another thing we talk about, the bystander coming up in this study as well. Students knew what was going on. And students were coming to, in 2 situations, students said to teachers, don't worry, we're with you. You know, we're on your side. And it's wrong if we're trying to, you know, ask students not to be bullying. But this was an interesting case because these 2 teachers were really not giving her back her power. And it was nearly like coming across that she was bullying them. So this is where I'm saying, you know, organisational change, but bring it back up again to the top. All that principal had to do was come back and say, okay, there is change here. You know, in 2 years the school has changed. There's new parents, there's new pupils, there's possibly some new teachers. So we always think of organisational change as 2 companies merging or this massive organisational change. We never think of the simple things. And it's coming up so often now because people are going on maternity leave. They might take 6 months, they might take an extra 6 months. People change in the job. And so it was, the principal had pulled back, and when the person was with me, it was still going on, and she was really, really upset. And I wouldn't give advice, and because that's not my position. And as a researcher, and even in the field I work in, and she went away. And I just hope, for her own sake, that she approached it in a different manner with the principal. But the principal herself didn't see her fault in it either. She didn't see how she had miscommunicated the whole situation either. And the younger teacher on the older teacher, that was terrible when I think of it. You know, there was this young teacher who, they were on some outing, and he went up to her and he said, do you wear a shawl like that around your shoulders when you're sitting at home watching TV? And nobody heard it. And she let that go, but then different things happened. And then one day she was sitting in a parent-teacher meeting, and everybody had gone, and he just walked over and said, "I see you got a new anti-wrinkle cream." And I mean, these are little snubs. This kept going on, you know, and she eventually started, she was afraid, fear, and one of the, to come right across my study in all of the first three categories, was she was afraid to go to her principal because she knew the principal favoured this young teacher. And she took early retirement because she just felt, I'm not going to continue with this. And there was loads of other stuff, you know. I'm just giving you two examples of what happened within that. So I found that it was it was widespread, and it was interesting when people asked me what I was doing my study on, and teachers asked me what I was doing my study on. Nobody said don't go there. Nobody said it doesn't happen. People knew it happened. People would just love if something, and would be willing if something could be done about it. The big problem, and it's a big problem not just in this study, it's a big problem in this whole area, is the framework and the time frame. In the policies, it usually says, in the informal policies, maybe you come back, we'll say for 2 weeks. People do not, the union officials, or the people, the principals, or the managers, or the line supervisors, they rarely keep to the time frame. Time frame is a huge thing in all of this. If this is to be resolved, the quicker it's resolved, the better. If someone brings a complaint, you might not want to hear it, but you have to listen. As a manager and supervisor, you owe a duty of care to your staff. It's important, I would say, to people to keep a note of what is said as well, so that you can report that back with the person when you meet them again. But these are the things that don't happen. And they're so simple. You know, they don't come with a diploma. They just come with just common sense. And people just don't do it. And then it comes back at them later. Because if someone is really badly bullied and they feel that, they will usually look to try and seek a resolution then with trade union officials. But there, and most likely, will turn this into an industrial relations issue. So you don't want to go there either. And that's where my work is, on intervention and prevention. And the procedures and policies, they were at present inadequate. Now, they have changed since I did my study. Oops. Mark.
Could be this connection. Sub seems to have completely lost power.
Sorry about that. Can I have some? Here, have it. Okay.
You on again?
Yeah, okay.
Just the power cable just came.
Did it? Okay, thank you. They have changed. There's a new one in now since I did my study. And also the government offices have brought a new one in this year as well, which is for all public servants. So this, I'm not sure, we'll have to see how effective this policy is as well. And that was something that I think will probably be done by researchers, and would love to be done by researchers, the effectiveness of policies. And that's what came up as well, that nobody used the policy, nobody knew how effective they were until something happened and people were just handed this policy. And therefore that was very difficult for principals, because principals haven't been trained. They're not aware of how to handle workplace bullying, and that's what came through in this, and very much came through then when it came to using the policy. Now, as I said, I had 4 categories. And the first category, people that were being bullied at the time. I'll just give you some of the snippets from the 4 categories. These were some of what people said. I knew once I challenged him that there would be trouble. Then my timetable was changed. This was the punishment for standing up to him. I was shocked, yet I was aware that he had consistently ignored union directives and did his own thing. And that was one thing that came up with many of the teachers, that the timetable, they'd be given very unreasonable hours for timetabling, and maybe late classes on a Friday. That's if they spoke up at all or said anything. And that was one that came through it as well. The people who felt it stopped, I thought I was going to get great stories. None of those stories, none of those issues stopped in a favourable manner. Some people were moved from job to another school. Other people took retirement. It was none of them were worked through correctly as they should have been. So this person said, people are not afraid. They know there is no point in going through with the procedures and policy. They are not afraid of the procedures, as they know there is a whole lot of stuff that can be gone through. But in the end, they are not going to be achieving anything. So people had stood back and watched other people taking complaints, saw what happened and decided what's the point. And that's what came up in some of the comments that came through on the survey, on the questionnaire. Now this came from a person who was accused of bullying. It's interfering with my relationships with colleagues, people I am friends with. It also means I have to make up my mind, the people I trust, and be careful of getting drawn into a protective care. You're watching what you do, pussyfooting around the place. And that's very similar to what came through with the people that felt they were being bullied. You know, some similar comments came through the very same. So they were reacting the very same. So it's very, very interesting. And then the people who felt they worked in a bully-free environment. And I had principals and I had teachers. And it was very interesting. The principals I did the interviews with all admitted they'd had no training. They were brought in for 3 days in the summer and then we were back into the school. One in particular had been a teacher in the school for 9 years and then was made principal. And he said, I said, how did you work with, now here you were and you're looking over your colleagues? And he said he started to see some of his colleagues in a different light. And he started to see things that he hadn't seen when he was colleagues with them, and now he was principal. However, he said he had to manage, and he decided he would go into the staff room every morning at 11 o'clock. One thing he spoke about was the great relationship he had with his deputy principal, and the way they divided their duties out, and the way their communication, and that's what came out most of all in this study, was the lack of communication. And with their communication, and he said to me, it wasn't that I had this perfect school and that I hadn't got any issues, but I did have issues. But I made sure I was there, and in my own way, he said, I would get around what is going on. He said, I never failed to see something through to the end, because I knew I would have toxic staff and a toxic staff room. And he said, I couldn't manage that. So he had that vision, but he'd never trained. And after the interview, he said to me, I think we had an interview for about an hour and a half, and it was action in the face. And he said to me, that's the first time I've discussed my job in detail, ever. You know, and he didn't really, my God, he said, I have such a responsible job, you know. But he was working every day, going along, plodding along. But he was a very interesting person to talk to. And this is another comment here. The principal and deputy principal work very much hand in hand, and always have done. Unless people work together, you tend not to be able to go forward and progress things. This is the ethos of management in their school. That was from one of the teachers. Very organised school this person came from. But you could see hard work behind it at the same time, hard structure. You know, it was dealt with, people moved on. So therefore, the management, this is definitely what the reaction to the complaints. The management ignored the initial signs, the complaints. In one stage, I recall the person saying the deputy principal heard two teachers heard them shouting at each other. Now, if that was two students, deputy principal take them in. And this deputy principal should go and have your arguments elsewhere. And she still says that if that had been addressed at that point, the issue would never have escalated where it did. They advised the complainant to go to their teacher union, reacted immediately and produced the document. That was 2006 to 2012, I think it is now. The different procedures, and this was difficult because if you have two, as I said earlier, if you have two unions in TUI and an ASTI and they're working from two different sets of procedures, very difficult. And that emerged in another public body with me there recently too. And it's also in nursing as well. You will have the nurses union, and then you have the administrative unions, you know, there could be SIP2 or IBEC for the admin staff. So there's a lot of that goes on, and it's very difficult. And, you know, which policy do you go by? Both policies are usually not the same. So which policy do you go by? So therefore, I'm back to intervention and prevention. The gap in communication, definitely communication. Just even back to that organisational change, that teacher coming back after 2 years, nobody taking her aside and saying, by the way, the three of them, because there's two actually doing their job, and saying, now things are changed, you're back in as your head, etc. Nothing like that. The bully-free working environment, as I said, they worked closely together, those people. They were aware of staff management. They were visible on the campus. And one thing they allowed was teachers' voice, and this comes out in this topic in other areas as well, staff meetings, etc. Some voices not being heard. even if they're not saying what you want them to, you want to hear, even letting them have their word and respecting that, and eye contact with them, and they might annoy you. They might be the person who really could do your job too, or something, and that can be threatening to some managers and supervisors. But listen, there's nothing wrong in listening, and that wasn't happening. That's what they said. The recommendations that the anti-bullying environment, they need to work very, very near together. In the policies at the moment, they don't have, a person who's accused doesn't necessarily have to respond. In a grievance policy, they do. So there's two policies going on, and one nearly crosses and overlaps over the other. And it's clarity again that has to be put out there. There is no clarity. And they need to train a peer expert team. The recommendations, effective policies, procedures. I would say communicate, monitor. People talk about their policies and procedures. If it's only once a year, at least do it. Rather than wait till something happens, because then everybody closes up. Where at least it is discussed on a regular basis, people will talk about it, and people will know what the situation is. So thank you.
Good, thank you, Genevieve. There's certainly not a lot to grab hold of and discuss there. Does anyone want to open up with a question?
I have.
This is quite a couple of years ago, because I used to teach
Sorry?
at a primary, older girls' primary school. And just before I left, there was one older teacher who had been consistently bullied for about 2 or 3 years by a younger teacher. And I mentioned it to the principal. It was a caretaker principal. She was an acting principal. And her answer to me was, I was going in the next couple of months, but we were the silent staff, people standing by watching this. And she said, well, there has to be a scapegoat on the staff, so it's better having one. And that was literally her reaction. I left, and I don't really know what's happened since. I mean, I didn't have much respect for that principal.
What an off-the-cuff remark, like.
What an off. But I mean, she was quite happy. She said, it saves me, because she had been one of the staff, and she didn't know whether she was going to get the principalship or not. That was a primary school.
Yeah.
And the older girls, the dynamics in an ex-convent and all that, there's all that kind of thing going on. But I mean, it was horrendous, and I just, can we not do something about it? I mean, I just had kind of mentioned it to her, because it was awful watching it. And she just said, no, she's a scapegoat, so long as she gets it, everybody else is happy. What do you do there?
It's very complex. It really is, and I feel like I would push that this is put into the socialisation. The new program for teachers. I feel teachers go to school, they go to college, and they go back to school. And the language, we were talking about this recently with teachers, they nearly talk the same language as students. No one in my study said when I'm at work. They all said when I'm at school. And they didn't see it. I don't know, they get their paycheck. They felt the department was up there, it was a paymaster. Then they had no communication with them either. So it's so complex. And I feel when I do the talk for Stephen there, and I've done talks out in DCU with students, teachers, and they're looking at you. And I recall some teachers on placement coming up to me and saying, one person came up, he said, I'm gay, and he said, the principal and deputy principal, he said, totally ignore me. And at least it was only on placement in the school. And I mean, this is where teachers need to be made aware, and I would say it to Andrew and I say it to other colleges, that a certain module in their training, that they know how the socialisation process, they know there's a language that you don't use, that there's a boundary line, that even though you're in school, you are now the adult in the school. And that doesn't seem to be come across. And management have a hard time. And I mean, there's so many players in schools. You have boards of management, deputy principal, principals, parents, students. It's huge.
Is there anything I could have done? I often look back and say, frankly, that poor person was doing.
Sorry?
Is there anything I could have done as a
Well, I mean, what could you do? I mean, unless you wanted to bring a complaint against her, say something.
Genevieve, thank you for that. That was very interesting. Your findings didn't include teacher-principal bullying, and I wondered about that because I've certainly been a participant in conversations amongst principals who've been bullied by teachers.
Yeah.
And there's no way the principals are going to go public about that because they don't want anyone knowing what's going on in their school. They're trying to promote their school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I also have heard some teachers say, we can understand why those teachers are bullying the principal because they missed out on the position of principal or deputy. And there's a huge personal agenda for them in who got the job. So there seems to me to be a lot of unresearched evidence of
Absolutely, yeah.
bullying by teachers or principals.
I know one that's going on. Wouldn't at the moment, I'd say it could escalate into, it's not, there's a situation that's not comfortable at the moment. And and I would know that this principal has done everything to try and make this school a good school. But I think that with all these part-time contracts and part-time teachers and hours, now I don't fully understand the whole complex of the school. There's, in this situation, she feels that one or two people are kind of manipulating a situation around them, and they're being firm, but they're not happy with what's going on, And I did a talk out there. I did a talk in that school, and again, it's not in their training. It's very difficult, and it's very difficult for principals because, as Clive Byrne was saying, they have no support.
I think you made a very good point, Genevieve, when you said that there are two different types of policies that happen, the bullying policy and then the grievance policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the case of where you have a teacher and another teacher not getting on well, they call it more grievance than they do bullying. And in the same light, a principal doesn't like to be thought of being bullied, and it's about grievance policies again. I think, and that's where the issues lie.
You see, in the grievance policy too, if the person that's accused has to come forward and spoke, they don't have. Now maybe that has changed in the most recent TUI policy. ASTI don't have anything like that, so it gets complicated. It's very complex, and this is why it escalates up, I think, to union level at a certain level, and then you have it into an industrial relations issue, and then as the complainant, one person said to me, I have now called a complainer. Because they're asking, when are you going to sort this out? And now all they see is this individual ringing up or knocking at the door and saying, when you said you'd be back to me a few weeks ago, and now they don't want to see this individual anymore. And that's feeding straight into the bullying situation, if you know where I'm coming from. But it's just they find it very difficult. I found fear of principals and fear with teachers one of my main themes, because principals are afraid to handle the situation, and people are afraid, as one of those people said, to go there because they've seen other people go there and nothing works out. So it is quite complex, but I think it's all about we talk about education, but it's awareness for both principals, deputy principals, and teachers. I would say a manager has a duty of care, employees have a duty as well in a workplace as well, and it's just that fine line, and it's just not spoken about, and it's not discussed at like a level like this, and that should be the important thing, I feel, with student teachers.
Just have one more question. In relation to the boards of management of schools, did anything come out of your findings from the teachers that they were supported by their boards of management, or they were not supported?
One teacher wrote a letter about her principal. Of course, he was secretary of the board, and he went absolutely berserk, and the board just pulled back, and she went through a terrible time over the whole situation, and then she got a union rep. She ended up out on, I think, sick leave for about 6 months, and she could not take the pressure that was going around, and people knew she was being bullied by her principal, but everybody pulled back. But again, it's lack of awareness.
Yeah.
It's what do we do? It's definitely is lack of awareness. Training, also how to handle and manage the situation.
And it struck me this time, I worked in a lot of schools with kids who had problems, and so there were often either kids who were bullied or bullying. And it really mirrors what the teachers do, is what they do when you go with a bullying case about a child. Baz it off, this stuff happens, she needs to stand up for herself, he needs to stop being a smart arse. They don't want to hear it, they want to push it back, and they hope it'll go away. And if you pursue, I've known parents who try to pursue it, and if the principal didn't like the family, they got a terrible time, and the child got more bullying because she was a whinge bag and all the rest of it. Her mother got bullied by the other parents being troublemaker. The teachers do exactly to the pupils what they then do to each other, what the principal does to them. It's a very hierarchical system.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you were saying, about saying they're in school. And, I went to work in schools for 2 days, and we'd walk into a staff room and people would ignore you completely, like other adults, 20 of them. No one offered you a cup of tea, no one said good morning. Like I've gone and sat in my car and had my lunch, and these are supposed to be well-educated adults. And I mean, you'd go in and would usually be the caretaker or one of the cleaners, go, take up tea, look, come sit down here with us. I'd usually go into the back room and sit with them. They were quite incapable of including somebody in many schools. So I think this very closed hierarchical system is part of it, why it's gone up so high.
Oh, well, this is what I really feel, and I mean, then how are you to manage school bullying under this type of behaviour as well? And I mean, I found, as I said, students were saying it to teachers. You know, we're with you, or they're talking about you, miss. One teacher said it was a class petition, and she knew. Then the students had said it to her, particularly at post-primary level. It's a very difficult situation. I cannot understand why. I mean, everybody, unions will say to me, this should be done, this should be done. You know, it's something has to be done. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. I found it very relevant. And out of curiosity, I'm wondering if your findings included gender at all in the way that people were bullied, female staff on female staff. Or
I didn't go into gender, and gender is something that's not. It's funny, isn't it, that even in general workplace bullying, gender is something there's not a lot of research on, although they do say women get bullied more and women bully women more overall. But that is one thing that comes out. You know, thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. This was really an eye-opening. It's something that really affects all of us, you know, at different working places. But I was really touched by the nature of the workplace bullying. It's really extensive, and for me, it is a social dynamic. You know, what do I say? A social issue.
Yeah.
And in looking at the social issues, it's not only the one bullying that you know, impacts on the one who is being bullied. So I was wondering whether from your interviews, whether something came out about the role played by the one bullied in this particular, you know, scenario.
How do you mean the role played by it?
And that is how can I put it? The role played by, for example, if I'm being bullied, what is my role? Do I get up and maybe confide in another friend, or reach out to somebody, or is it because of one of the issues you mentioned there is like having low self-esteem?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the role played by the one being bullied. So, did you?
Well, I'm trying to get your question. The bully, it comes out that both have low self-esteem, but research shows that alleged bullies would have good social skills towards people that would not be, say, victim targets. Victim targets were more conscientious, they were more into justice and more, maybe more serious, you know, about life. And where bullies, alleged bullies seem to be, a lot of them would be very pleasant in company, and people would never ever dream that they would be rude or would do things to someone when they have them on their own. And they would behave one way with me and another way with you. But in company, if we're in a group sitting around a table, we'd be all treated the same. So it's very, very subtle. And therefore, one has to be very, I would say to people today, you know, I was talking to someone on the phone the other day, and they were absolutely so wound up, so anxious. And it's just to say, calm down, calm down. It's not, if it's happening, it's happening. Calm down, own your own self in this. Come back into your own body, because it nearly brings you out of your body when you're bullied, and it brings a side out in you that you probably don't even know. So it means to try and get back into yourself and not let someone else take you as a person away. And it's, I suppose today I would be very conscious of people, and I'd be very aware. And even if other people didn't see what I see, that's okay. Because I am in charge of my life, if you know where I'm coming from. And we all are in charge of our own lives. And I think people, in a workplace, people can let that guard down. And I think this is what I feel when we talk about this psychological contract in a workplace, that we have to respect each other and expect difference and acknowledge difference, but we're there to do a job. And I think management have to be aware of that too. It's very easy. I know I was a manager, I had a great PA, he was a marvellous, but he could do my job. Definitely, you know, I mean, when I went on holiday, clients would say to me, where'd you get him? He's a gem. And he could annoy you, but I was aware, and he was he was so supportive. And if people only realise, if you bring staff with you, the amount of goodness and the amount of good productivity you get out of staff when you bring them with you. There's no point in playing mind games, but some people are like that. And people get jobs, as I say, because they're good at the job. No one else can they manage people. Okay.
Time for one very quick question.
One quick one. 2 years ago, Genevieve, I was at a summer school here in Trinity. It was for PhD students from all faculties in Trinity. And one of the workshops, quite a number of students reported being bullied by their supervisor. I just wondered, and they all said, when challenged by the leader of the workshop, that there's no way they're going to go through the complaints procedure because they didn't want, bad name, they didn't want to rock the boat, they didn't want, etc. They wanted to get their study finished and get through. I just wondered if there is any research being done at college level in Ireland.
Leanne did a study on third level students. It was a quantitative study, if you recall, Andrew. Yeah, she did it for her master's, and I think there is a person now going to do a study on third level students, because a lot of them say they're bullied by their supervisors, and a lot of them find it very difficult to do anything about it, and therefore there's a lot of dropout from that as well. That's just now, from listening to people talking, and this person who's now just started a master's, they're doing it as well. But Leanne did a quantitative one, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Excellent. Sorry about all that at the beginning. I've explained.
Thank you, Andrew.
I've explained to David there that in future it was given sufficient warning that this is going to take place.
Yeah, because very few knew about it.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the actual.
Hello. Bye-bye.
My name's Heidi, and I work with the master students in School of Education, and many of them expressed interest in this topic, but unfortunately no one can come because they're all student teaching. So I wondered if you would be interested at all in sharing your findings in some way.
Well, I could do a talk to a student. When do you have
I would organize it. Generally, their availability is after 6 p.m. because they're in lectures or schools.
Have you an email address?
I do.
And I could email and we could
That
arrange.
would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
Most are teachers, others